Hello, my name is Valerie Eaton of the Peekskill NAACP. I am your president. We're going to introduce you to all of the CD17 candidates who we have interviewed. Today, they will answer a very important question from our Economic Empowerment Committee. Please welcome our Economic Empowerment Chair, Elizabeth Phillips Branchcombe.
What's your view with regards to gentrification? In the Hudson Valley region, our concern is how would you approach minimizing the displacement of residents? In addition, what would be your thoughts and actions around reparations? Historically, there's been some precedents to redress injustices, particularly around Japanese Americans during World War II, even the current bailouts that are happening in the auto and the travel industry. Do you have the political will to support reparations for us as Black African Americans?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, all right. So first of all, in gentrification, the key thing there obviously is housing, which you mentioned. So HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Agency, the federal agency, has 30% of the funding today that it had in 1970. So obviously, we're clearly not prioritizing affordable housing in America. So we need to do something about increasing, at the federal level, increasing the budget for HUD, and then doing more things to make it easier for people to afford housing, like providing tax incentives, like providing incentives for repurposing existing buildings. So let's say a schoolhouse, because we have changes in demographics, let's say a schoolhouse that's no longer needed, or a mall. We repurpose it and give incentives to builders to provide housing, to build housing on existing places, not tear down trees and stuff like that. Or modular housing, which is cheaper and you can put up somewhere without, taking down a lot of trees, for example. So I think we need to do more things to create more housing that is affordable. And that's separate from low-income housing, because I know I've talked to Andre Rainey. There's actually pretty good, they've got a good handle on the affordable housing. I mean, the low-income housing is my understanding in Peekskill, but the affordable housing is the problem, and actually not just in Peekskill, but across the board. So that's one way to push back against the gentrification, because that just immediately impacts on the cost of housing. And then, of course, for small business owners, the cost of leases. So additional issue, which I'm not sure whether we can address at the federal level, but I'd be happy to look into it. On the reparations question, what I wrote about in the op-ed that I had in The Hill, it's a newspaper that primarily targets people who are working in and around The Hill, but it's called The Hill. And because I was trying to get the attention of lawmakers at the time, and the piece came out, I think, in 2018, maybe, I don't even remember, but I was out of government by then. And it basically called for the commission I mentioned. And then one of the things I thought could be a first step to address reparations would be to look at, because I also understand how members of Congress think, and they generally want to do something for veterans. So I said, okay, how about the first community it can look at are African Americans who served, who weren't able to take advantage of the GI Bill because of racism. So, and the GI Bill was primarily funding for school or mortgages. So redlining was a big thing, and obviously racism in terms of getting into schools. So if you could identify current veterans or their offspring who did not take advantage of the GI Bill because of racism, and I understand you have to have some kind of way of, I guess, filing for this, but it's not that hard, I don't think, to identify that population and start with that, because it's very concrete. And most people understand that was a right that those people were effectively denied, right? That was a right that they didn't take advantage of because of the systemic racism. So that was my proposal in the piece, but I'm open to other ideas as well. The reason I proposed that one was because I know that defense community, and I know those committees that dole out the money and and write the legislation. So I thought, I actually went, after I wrote the op-ed, I went up to the Hill and I talked to my former colleagues who work on the House and Senate Armed Services committees about how you could implement it. And they said they thought it was too hard a lift. We need a Democratic administration because you need money. and it was the veterans committees that would have to do it. But I had the actual conversation. I talked to John Conyers' staff, who, you know, at the time he was still in Congress and alive, about it. And those people are still there working on the Hill, his former staffers, many of them. And I know there are people who would be interested in figuring out how to make this feasible. It wouldn't probably happen overnight because people get really nervous about these sorts of things that cost money, but whatever. Then you do a 6-month study, you have the GAO look at what it would cost and how you would implement it. All of these things are doable, but that was the one place I thought we could start with. There are other places you could, you know, again, it would be up to the experts to say, okay, here are the places where the legacy has been really bad. So for example, maybe criminal justice, maybe people who are wrongfully sent to prison, basically because people just pointed at them because of the color of their skin, something like that. The restitution would go, I mean, I think there's been some restitution given to those people through the court system, but you know, I'm thinking sort of off the top of my head, but I know there are experts on this. And so it just really takes somebody looking across the board and saying, okay, who are the communities that have been hardest hit? Where is it easiest to start? Let's just be practical, right? And then start there. And then you build consensus. The problem is when people hear restitution, they think like, what I mean is everybody who's, you know, descended from Africa is going to get like some chunk of money. You know, they throw up these, what are they called? Red herrings or whatever, you know, false arguments. That's not what anyone's talking about. So I think it's to start somewhere, then shows everyone, oh, this is doable.
I'm really proud of the fact that I'm a candidate in this race who's been elevating housing justice. As I mentioned earlier, grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps. Housing even more than healthcare is just sort of this immediate need that everyone has, right? Everyone has to have a roof over his or her head. And if you got children, it's even more dire that you do that. And so people, unfortunately, are making crazy decisions about whether they're going to be able to pay their monthly rent or make their monthly mortgage payment and be able to pay for their healthcare expenses. We know that in Westchester County, for example, that where Peekskill is located, obviously, that over 70,000 households pay more than 50% of their monthly income in rent. We know that for over 140,000 households, people are paying more than 30% of their monthly income towards rent. And we know also that in the Westchester County, over 11,000 people, according to that housing needs assessment survey that was done a few years ago, are completely homeless. That is unacceptable in a nation as wealthy as our own. We need to dramatically increase our investment in affordable housing. I prefer mixed income housing where you can't even tell the difference between whether a unit is market or so-called affordable. We also need to, by the way, adjust our understanding of what is affordable, because we know that in the lower Hudson Valley, where we are located, that affordable means something very different than what it means in Mississippi, for example. We are at ground zero for the housing affordability crisis. And if we are going to get serious about preventing the displacement of people who have been longtime members of our community, because these new buildings are popping up, then we have to make sure that these new buildings include affordable units, and that the federal government and the state government, but I'm running to be a member of Congress, so the federal government is making sure that we are investing and making sure that we are building affordable units all throughout this district and all throughout this country, to make sure that everyone has a place to live and they can do so in comfort and in dignity. Yeah, you know, we are in a society where the wealth gap, that tremendous wealth gap that we are seeing between Black people, Black families and white families, is due to a long history of discrimination, oftentimes at the hands of government. When we talk about redlining, for example, literally drawing entire zones and preventing Black families from getting liquidity, getting credit in order to be able to purchase homes. And we know that the single biggest generator of wealth in our country is home ownership. We also know that there's been discrimination in the employment context and elsewhere. I support a commission that would study the impacts of slavery and Jim Crow and other discrimination against Black people in this country to see how best to implement reparative justice in our society. Now, there is definitely a precedent for reparations in our society in other contexts, and I think we just have to be smart and thoughtful about how to do it in a way that is going to be most impactful for people living in our society.
I love this question because I will tell you right now, I'm the only candidate that has the political courage to actually support to fix this issue. I have said in several times on many forums, and actually been attacked for this, that we need to support universal rent control, because many people who live along the Hudson River Valley, especially where I grew up in Terrytown, right down in the river area, we feel like we don't have a voice, and many of them are not empowered to voice their opinion against these companies that are investing to gentrify our areas and raise the cost of living. And look at East Post Road as well as South Lexington. They definitely don't have a voice. They're rebuilding, they kick you out of the buildings and they rebuild it. And then when you reapply, some of them are not able to move back into those buildings, and many of them move to the South. That is an indicator that the process is not fair. And I'm willing to stand up for that small man or woman to ensure that they are given the equal right or the best treatment as far as living here or protected from these gentrification companies. And I will tell you, not all my opponents have the political courage to do so. In Rockland, the situation is a little bit more different, where you have a group that's expanding its ownership and kicking people out from their own homes that they lived for 30-something years. And it's hard for them to stand up against this group, but I'm willing to set up a commission, a commission that involves mediating between those that have lived there and working with those that are expanding into these areas and not caring about them, and figure out a way on how we can live all together and not be treated unfairly. So I am very passionate about this issue, and you could trust me to address this issue on the federal level. I was the only candidate at the Greenberg NAACP forum that was very clear that I support reparations. In fact, I've been following this issue since the Ferguson crisis out in St. Louis, where I noticed that the Black community has changed in terms of how they look at economics. Also, I'm a foreign policy expert, so I follow issues coming out of the United Nations. The United Nations also says that based on the ongoing discriminatory economic laws that have been passed to hurt the wealth of African Americans, especially ADOS, which I'm a descendant of slave, the United States government owes them money. Absolutely. So I definitely support that we have a commission right now that's looking into this issue. I will tell you, I'm not sure how this is going to look. Is it a paycheck? How much? Not sure. But I definitely support this, that we have a study that's looking at this. And I'm so happy to see that, because at one point in our lifetimes, we couldn't even say reparations. Many of us said, oh, it'll never happen. Now the conversation has been normalized, saying, oh no, reparations, we definitely need. And you can trust me in that. And I will tell you, some people have told me, don't talk about it. But again, I am the only one with the political courage to support reparations, because I come from that community of people. I am a descendant of slave. I do not come from generational wealth like a lot of my opponents. So I know how much that has impacted me. In fact, it's impacting me right now in this race. A lot of my opponents have generational wealth. They were given reparations for some of them. I was never given reparations. So that put me at a disadvantage, in terms of, funding my political campaign. So I'm definitely for reparations.
So the part one is, I think on some level, some aspects of what people call gentrification is a good thing, in the sense that if property values go up for people who own homes, that helps them. And if more services are delivered because there's more resources in communities, that can be good too. But it has to be done in a way where people who grew up in a place and live in a place can stay in a place and aren't forced out. and aren't forced to leave their homes and their communities. We want to enhance communities with more resources and not split them apart and send them elsewhere. And so I know, because I've spoken to a lot of people in Peekskill, and that's a problem. There are people who grew up in Peekskill who have to move to Beacon and other places. And by the way, when I say I spoke to people in Peekskill, you probably know this, Deputy Mayor Vivian McKenzie and former Deputy Mayor Drew Claxton have endorsed my campaign. So I've spent some time, and we have an office in Peekskill that we barely got warmed up and got going before Corona hit, but we have it. So I've heard about this and this concern in the community. And you know, my view is I've also spoken to affordable housing developers, because I want to know directly from the source, the folks that build housing that people can live in. And I don't just mean public housing, I mean affordable private units, which I view as the best backbone of a community. Give people an ownership interest in their own homes, and not just at the folks who need it the most, but even into the middle class. And so I've asked developers, what can we do to make more units available? And the best thing we can do is have federal and state tax policy be supportive of those affordable homes, so that developers have an incentive that if you build 50 units somewhere, you can make the math work, that they're not going to lose money. And so we need to be more supportive with our tax policies to make that happen and nudge them into building those units. The other thing I'll say is just culturally on that, you know, Chappaqua had a problem with that. And one of my other endorsers, Barbara Gerard, she was the 2-time supervisor in Chappaqua in Newcastle. She ran into a buzzsaw because she tried to bring affordable housing units to Chappaqua. And there were people on one side who said, I think they didn't really mean this, but they said, well, these aren't nice enough, so you shouldn't build them. Then there are, of course, other people who just said, we just don't want this affordable housing stuff here. Like, get this out of our community. And I think you need leaders to stand up and say, you know, you can't be for equality, you can't be for accessibility, you can't be for diversity, but have it be only for somewhere else. It has to be where you live. You know, you can't be for somebody else to do something to be inclusive. It has to be in your backyard too. Otherwise, you're not for inclusion. And so I was very proud to get her endorsement. And before she gave it to me, she said, you know, you may want to take a step back and ask some people. You know, a lot of people got mad about my affordable housing stuff when I tried to bring these units. And I said, I don't care. I'm proud to have you endorse me because I believe we got to tell everybody, you know, you can't just be for this stuff somewhere else. You got to be for this stuff where you live too. And so that's how I feel about it. We need tax incentives to bring the units, and we need leaders in the community to say, you know, every community should be diverse. Every community should have people who bring all sorts of different experiences and different socioeconomic backgrounds to one school. That's the beauty of public schools. Even in a place like Chappaqua, the great part about a public school is you get a lot more diversity of experience and background than you do in any kind of private school, which is why I feel so lucky to have graduated from public school. So I think that covers that answer. As for reparations, I haven't come to a final view on that. I have some concerns in terms of I'd rather get down to rolling out and messaging programs that really help the people who need the most help without falling into a divisive thing, because I think that issue has become very, I guess you could say, like there's a lot of controversy there, and other groups feel like, well, how to execute it in a way that brings people together. So I don't have a final view on reparations one way or another. I think I would have to be flexible in, is this the best way to benefit the people who need to be benefited? And I know that reading 1619, the New York Times Magazine edition, did everybody read that last spring? I mean, that really opened my eyes to a lot in terms of everything from sugar to, you know, all of New Orleans history. My wife's from New Orleans, and she's very proud to see Mitch Landrieu the last few years tear down all the statues and the monuments. I always say to people, you know, it's crazy that half our country thinks it's okay to have a Confederate flag. I mean, that would be for me as a guy whose grandpa was in the Holocaust and was a slave in a Nazi labor camp. You know, if I saw a swastika and someone said, well, that's my heritage, I would not feel very welcome. And I would think that that's not appropriate. And so I'd like to find ways to address our past and come to terms with it. And if reparations is the best way, I'm open-minded to it. But I know that we do need to, I'm proud of the progress we've made, and we need to make some more. I think New Orleans is a great example where they had some real leadership, and they took down those statues of Confederate generals. And we need to keep doing that all over the South. And we need to send the message that we've confronted our history and we understand it, and it's had hundreds of years of effects. So if that's part of the conversation, I'm open.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that we are getting squeezed out of the Hudson Valley. It's becoming less and less affordable. One of the pieces of legislation that I'm very proud of is extending and strengthening the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. And basically what that does is allow for stricter and tougher or stricter guidelines in terms of protecting tenants when we talk about rentals, and allowing for certain rental properties to come under rent control. As you can imagine, this wasn't an easy piece of legislation to pass. I'm the only candidate in the race that supported that legislation, and when given the opportunity, voted for it. One of my colleagues in the race voted against it. And I think that's very important. I say that because it's not one of those, you get beat up either side you go, right? But I think that was very important to make sure that we have some affordable places still in Westchester County and in Rockland County, and that was important to do. So that's the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. In addition to that, I think that when we have a debate going on in this country about the separation between the rich and the poor. And I agree that the wealthy need to pay their fair share. And we need to increase taxes on the wealthiest in this country. There's no question about it. But at the same time that we do that, we have to protect middle-class families and allow for people to still have that pathway out of poverty into the middle class and expand it. And what's a way that we do that? As we're taxing the rich, we need to decrease the taxes on the poorest and middle-class families. So while that debate is going on, part of my platform is not just to raise taxes on the richest, which I want to do, but as we do that and have more revenue, we should be giving relief to our lower income families. And in addition to that, we have a benefits cliff in this country where people that are receiving public benefits, that once they earn a little bit of money, they lose those benefits. And it's a disincentive, and it's sometimes in an unescapable way. If you're raising a family and you're receiving an income, and then you want to work, and then you'll make less doing that, that's a real problem, and it doesn't allow people to build up a nest egg. So one of the strategies that I have is to allow some of the same tax strategies that help the richest people in this country, allow lower income families to be able to participate in that. So one of the bills that I was able to pass in New York, it's called the ABLE Act. It stands for Achieve a Better Life Experience. And what that does is this is for people with a qualifying disability to be able to save money tax-free that doesn't count against their public benefits. So the idea there is that you can start to build a nest egg and escape living paycheck to paycheck. So some of the strategies as well that I would like to see our IRS, the Internal Revenue System, our tax code follow, is allowing those strategies, incentivize and why not give a tax benefit to lower income individuals to start to save, to build that nest egg and escape poverty. And that's something I think is extremely important. So one of the things that has differentiated me in our tax policies of the candidates in this race are that I focused on lowering taxes for lower income individuals. And in addition to that, we all know, the capital gains tax, and people are talking about that. And that's the tax that you pay on if you buy stock and sell it and you make a profit on it, you pay taxes on that. So to me, I say that any family earning less than $150,000 a year should pay no capital gains tax. Why not incentivize our lower income individuals to play in the stock market, do what the richest in this country are doing, and benefit from it? So those are some of the things that I think are important that we could be doing to really switch the paradigm. That all of these strategies that help the wealthiest, why don't we allow and help middle-class families and poor individuals and poor families benefit from those tax strategies and start to build a nest egg and live that American dream.
Thank you for that. So I want to shift gears slightly. Sounds like you've been tuning into some of our economic empowerment meetings where we say if you're not talking about Black wealth or poverty, you're not talking about anything. But with that, my follow-up is thinking about reparations, and given that there's been a precedent, when we think about the fact that there has been legislation that was passed for our Japanese Americans, even the present day bailouts that are going on in terms of the travel and the auto industries, what would be your approach? Do you have the political will to address reparations for Black African Americans?
Yes, we actually have a bill in the New York State Senate that would be pushing and reparations in New York State and pushing the federal government to do that. I'm a co-sponsor of that legislation. I think it's very important and something that I would pick up and co-sponsor the federal legislation that's been in the House for years. I think in addition to that, I think reparations are important and necessary. And what we need to be doing as well, we're talking about financial empowerment, that financial literacy has to be part of the curriculum. To me, I've seen it over and over again. Now, my background, when I graduated college, I became a financial planner at American Express. And so that's why I'm obsessed with this, because I know that there are strategies that can be done, and there's things that people do that they just don't know, and they're making the wrong decisions. And I think there's a corporate interest to target people and keep them down and have them getting them in debt and paying high interest rates for the rest of their life. And that's a cycle that we can break. But we need to empower people by teaching financial literacy and allowing that to be, that to me should be another subject, just like history and math and English in our schools. Financial literacy should be another part of that. In addition, I would talk about mental health as well, but I think financial literacy should be part of the equation, that we know that people that are taught those strategies can be so much more independent, and in doing that, be empowered to live the life that they're really meant to live.